Can Australia Magnitsky Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other Israeli leaders and soldiers potentially involved in genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity and other human rights abuses? With recent news of the Israeli government's intentions to amp up its genocidal campaign against innocent Palestinians in Gaza by either ethnically cleansing them from their land or starving them to death, it's right for you to ask, what is the Australian government doing to stop the worst of all crimes being committed live streamed to our phones? What could and should the Australian government be doing, especially with its significant majority following the recent federal election? Where are Australia's red lines when it comes to preventing the world's worst crimes? The Australian government does have binding international legal responsibilities to prevent and punish genocide, both under the International Genocide Convention, including via our own laws in the Commonwealth Criminal Code. Well, there are also many other options to stop Israel's complete siege of Gaza, effectively starving a population of over 2 million people to death. A Magnitsky Act is a type of legislation that enables governments to impose economic sanctions against foreign individuals or entities who commit or are involved in serious human rights abuses and corruption abroad. This legislation operates extraterritorially, which means it can operate worldwide, thereby imposing penalties on individuals or companies, including freezing and requisitioning assets, and also imposing travel bans for acts performed. The Magnitsky Act, or legislation, derives its name from US laws enacted to sanction the individuals responsible for the 2009 murder of Russian lawyer and whistleblower Sergei Magnitsky. Mr. Magnitsky was a lawyer and was tortured and died in a Russian prison cell when he was just 37 years old after uncovering significant state corruption involving a $230 million tax fraud perpetrated by officials in the Russian government and involving companies that were confiscated from an American financier, Bill Browder. Browder was an American hedge fund manager who claims Magnitsky, one of his Moscow employees, was wrongly imprisoned and murdered by Russian police. Browder, the man behind the global Magnitsky push, has said that the beauty of the penalties is that they target individual wrongdoers rather than putting whole nations under punishing economic sanctions, which of course also punish innocent citizens. So Magnitsky laws seek to combat human rights abuses by naming, blaming and shaming individuals, denying them the right to enter democratic nations and stripping them of ill-gotten funds. One of Australia's most acclaimed international jurists and human rights barristers, Geoffrey Robertson, is a strong supporter of Magnitsky-type laws and even wrote a book on their power and potential in stamping out human rights abuses where other international measures have failed. And clearly, there's been a lot of failure in trying to rein in Israel's war crimes in Gaza in the last 19 months. Magnitsky laws have been enacted by many countries, including the USA, Canada, the United Kingdom, the European Union, and, thankfully, Australia. On the 3rd of December 2019, the former Liberal Minister for Foreign Affairs in the Morrison government, Marise Payne, asked the Joint Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Human Rights Subcommittee to inquire into the use of targeted sanctions to address human rights abuses around the world. A year later, on the 7th of December 2020, the committee tabled its report entitled, quote, "Criminality, Corruption and Impunity. Should Australia join the global Magnitsky movement?" End quote. The first recommendation of the report was that the Australian government enacts standalone targeted sanctions legislation to address human rights violations and corruption, similar to the United States Magnitsky Act of 2012. The Australian legislation, called the, quote, "Autonomous Sanctions Amendment, Magnitsky-Style and Other Thematic Sanctions Act," and it was enacted by the Australian Parliament in December 2021, although you may not have heard of it. Reportedly, the new law was welcomed by all sides of politics, as well as the media. Then, on 29th of March 2022, the Australian government used its Magnitsky laws for the first time to sanction 39 Russian individuals who were, quote, "accused of serious corruption and involvement in the death and abuse of Mr. Magnitsky. In the press release, former Foreign Minister Maurice Payne of the Morrison Liberal National Government stated, quote, "These individuals will be subjected to targeted financial sanctions, including asset freezes and travel bans. This will ensure that Australia does not become a safe haven for those already locked out of like-minded countries and their financial systems." Mr. Magnitsky's case inspired an international movement of sanctions laws to hold those responsible for his death to account and to enable sanctions to be applied to other perpetrators of serious human rights violations and abuses wherever they occur in the world. This is the first of what will be ongoing sanctions using Magnitsky-style reforms we passed in December, end quote. So then why can't Australia use its Magnitsky laws to name and shame Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other Israeli government and military officials involved in the plausible genocide in Gaza and the complete siege of Gaza over the last couple of months, where no water, food or medicines have been allowed into the Strip, and there is widespread evidence of children, babies and adults being starved to death. This is especially now that the Australian Albanese government has a resounding majority following the recent federal election. So the simple answer is that Australia can impose the sanctions and should do so. And you, my dear viewers and listeners, should talk to your local Member of Parliament about this. And while you're there, also ask why Australian Labor Attorney General Mark Dreyfus flew to Israel in January this year to, quote, repair the relationship and, quote, ease tensions with an alleged war criminal-led government, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, who's subject of an arrest warrant by the International Criminal Court. And of course, Australia has ratified the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court and implemented legislation in Australia to reflect those international binding obligations. And therefore, we have an international binding obligation to enforce the powers of the International Criminal Court. So if you want to stand up for peace and justice in the world, especially at this very urgent time for over 2 million innocent Palestinian people, please speak to your local Member of Parliament and telephone your Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, on this number to demand that he put Magnitsky sanctions on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other members of his pro-genocidal government and military until they end the complete siege of Gaza and let in humanitarian aid, water, medicines, and the basic necessities of life, and until there is full accountability for all of the crimes that have been committed and live streamed to your phones. If you're interested in more, please check out our recent interview on the Seeking Justice podcast with our friends in Gaza and with UN Special Rapporteur on Counterterrorism and Human Rights, Professor Ben Saul, who discusses with us what Australia could and should be doing to uphold the law and to, quote, prevent and punish the genocide in Gaza, including by naming and shaming Prime Minister Netanyahu and others with individual sanctions under our Magnitsky laws. Next week, we're excited to be interviewing Dr. Mohammed Mustafa, or Dr. Mo, as you probably know him from social media, a courageous English-Australian emergency physician from Perth who recently returned from witnessing firsthand the absolute horrors in Gaza. Please like and share this video, and please use the hashtag #AlboStopTheSiege and hashtag #AlboStopTheGenocide. And let's finally turn this into a massive social media campaign that our politicians can no longer ignore.